I suspected my wife was priming a clean-out, so I moved the assets first. 2 weeks later, she filed, then called it a prank when the trust didn't laugh. What's up, Reddit? This happened over the past few months, and I'm still processing the sheer audacity of it all. My now ex-wife thought she could pull a fast one on me, but turns out I'm not as clueless as she assumed. Buckle up because this shit gets wild. Some background first. I 38 male, and I run a small but successful construction company here in Colorado. Started it from nothing 12 years ago. Just me, a beat-up Toyota Tacoma, and enough stubborn determination to convince people I knew what I was doing. Those early years were brutal. I'm talking about bidding on every small job I could find, working 16-hour days, and eating ramen for dinner more nights than I'd like to admit. The construction business isn't for the weak. You're dealing with weather delays, supply chain issues, contractors who disappear in the middle of jobs, and clients who change their minds every 5 minutes. I learned early that success comes down to 3 things. Show up on time, do quality work, and don't bullshit people about timelines or costs. My first real break came in year 3 when I landed a contract to renovate this old Victorian house for a retired judge. Guy was a perfectionist who'd already fired 2 contractors for shoddy work. I spent 3 months on that job, working weekends, sourcing period-appropriate materials, basically treating his house like it was my own. When it was finished, he was so impressed he started referring other clients. That's how you build a business in construction, one satisfied customer at a time. Word of mouth is everything in this industry. Screw up one job and everyone in town knows about it by Thursday. But I stuck with it, slowly built up a reputation for quality work that comes in on time and under budget. Now we've got 8 full-time guys, 3 work trucks, and enough equipment to handle pretty much any residential or small commercial job in the area. Nothing flashy, but it pays the bills, and then some. The key to success in construction isn't just doing good work. It's understanding that half your clients don't know what they actually want until they see it, and the other half think they know better than you how to build their own house. You learn to navigate both types while keeping projects profitable. My guys are solid too. Most of them have been with me for years. There's Danny, my lead carpenter, who can eyeball measurements better than most people can with a tape measure. Jorge handles all our electrical work and moonlights as the crew comedian. Big Jim does the heavy lifting and has never met a structural problem he couldn't solve with proper engineering and creative cursing. When you're running a small business, especially in construction, your reputation is everything. One bad Yelp review from some entitled homeowner can cost you thousands in future business. So I've always been careful about who I work with, both clients and employees. Trust but verify, as they say. I met Sarah, 35F, about 6 years ago at my buddy Tom's housewarming party. Tom's one of those guys who throws parties like he's running for mayor. Invited half the town, full spread of food, and enough beer to float a boat. Sarah was there with a group of her nurse friends from the hospital. She seemed different from the usual bar scene crowd. Down to earth, laughed at my terrible construction jokes, and didn't immediately ask what kind of car I drove or what neighborhood I lived in. We hit it off, started dating, and 2 years later, I put a ring on it. Sarah worked as a registered nurse at the county hospital, mostly in the emergency department. Stressful job, long hours, dealing with everything from heart attacks to drug overdoses to domestic violence cases. I respected the hell out of what she did. Takes a special kind of person to handle that level of human misery on a daily basis. For the first few years, things were solid. Sarah had her nursing career, I had the business, and we both worked hard during the week, then enjoyed our weekends together. She'd come to some of the work sites when we were doing interesting projects, ask questions about the process, even brought lunch for the crew a few times. The guys liked her, which was important to me. Sarah was also good with money, at least initially. She had her own savings account, contributed to the household expenses proportionally to her income, and never made me feel like I was her personal ATM. We split most things down the middle like adults in a healthy relationship. She understood that construction income can be irregular. Some months are feast, some are famine depending on weather and project scheduling. Never gave me grief when I had to work weekends or when a job ran long due to permit delays or material shortages. We bought a house together 3 years ago, a nice 3-bedroom ranch on 2 acres outside town. Nothing crazy fancy, but solid construction. I checked every square inch of that foundation myself, with room to grow. Sarah picked out most of the interior stuff. I handled the workshop setup in the garage, and we split the mortgage down the middle like adults. The house had good bones, but needed work. I spent most of my first year there updating the electrical, replumbing the master bathroom, and refinishing the hardwood floors. Sarah helped where she could, though her idea of helping usually involved picking out paint colors and ordering new fixtures online. We talked about kids eventually, maybe expanding the house, putting in a proper workshop building for the business equipment. Normal couple stuff. I figured we'd spend the next decade or so building something together, improving the house, growing the business, maybe starting a family when the timing felt right. The red flags started subtle, like they always do. About 8 months ago, Sarah began asking weird questions about the business. Not the usual, how was your day stuff, but specific financial questions. How much profit we made per job, what our monthly overhead looked like, whether I had business insurance and what it covered. At first, I figured she was just being supportive, maybe thinking about our long-term financial planning. She'd started talking about wanting kids, buying a bigger house, that kind of future stuff couples discuss. Made sense she'd want to understand our finances better. But then she started asking about things that seemed oddly specific, like whether the business vehicles were in my name or the company's name, whether I kept business and personal accounts separate, how much cash we typically had in reserves. Just trying to understand everything better, she'd say when I'd give her a curious look. I want to be a real partner in planning our future. Fair enough. I'm not secretive about money. Grew up in a house where my parents fought about finances because nobody knew what was going on. Always promised myself I'd be transparent with my wife about our situation. So I answered her questions, showed her the books, explained how construction cash flow works, even walked her through some of the bigger contracts we had coming up. She seemed really engaged, taking notes, asking follow-up questions. The questions got more specific over time. She wanted to know about equipment depreciation schedules, business tax strategies, even asked about the partnership structure I had with my equipment supplier. Stuff that most spouses wouldn't care about unless they were planning to get involved in the business somehow. Are you thinking about leaving nursing? I asked her one night after she'd spent 20 minutes grilling me about workers' compensation insurance policies. No, nothing like that. I just want to understand what we're building together. Should have been a good sign. Wasn't. The next red flag was her sudden interest in estate planning. Sarah had never cared about wills or trusts before. Used to joke that we were too young to worry about that stuff. But sometime around March, she started bringing up articles she'd read about asset protection. Did you know that if something happens to you, the IRS could come after the business? She said one night over dinner, showing me some article on her phone. Says here that married couples should have everything in joint trust to protect each other. I'd actually thought about this before, but from a business liability perspective. Construction work is inherently dangerous. If someone got hurt on a job site and decided to sue, I wanted our personal assets protected. Had been meaning to talk to my lawyer about setting up some proper structures. Yeah, I've been thinking about that too, I told her. Maybe we should meet with an estate planning attorney, get some advice. Her face lit up. Really? That's such a great idea. I already found this lawyer who specializes in family asset protection. Maybe I could set up a consultation. That should have been red flag number 3 right there. My wife, who usually made me handle all the business stuff, had already researched family asset protection attorneys, but I was busy with a big renovation project and figured she was just being proactive. The renovation was this massive Victorian house downtown that the new owners wanted to convert into a bed and breakfast. Historical preservation requirements meant every change had to be approved by the city's Architectural Review Board, which added months to the timeline. Plus, we had to source period-appropriate materials for everything, which meant calling specialty suppliers and waiting weeks for custom millwork. Big mistake trusting Sarah's lawyer recommendation. The lawyer she found was this smooth-talking guy named Richard, who had an office downtown with expensive furniture and walls covered in certificates. Real used car salesman vibe, but I figured maybe that's just how lawyers are. Richard looked like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. Perfectly styled hair, $1,000 suit, shoes that probably cost more than most people's rent. His office had that fake mahogany paneling and leather chairs that are supposed to make you feel like you're dealing with serious professionals. During our consultation, Richard kept emphasizing how important it was for married couples to have equal access to all assets. Kept using phrases like full transparency and shared ownership structures and protecting the surviving spouse. He had this whole presentation prepared, complete with charts and graphs showing different trust structures. Talked about tax implications, creditor protection, estate planning strategies. Sounded impressive if you didn't know what questions to ask. He recommended setting up a joint revocable trust with both our names on everything. Business, house, bank accounts, investment portfolio, everything would go into the trust, and we'd both be equal beneficiaries and trustees. Sarah was nodding along enthusiastically. This makes so much sense. I'd feel so much more secure knowing we both have equal protection. I asked about what would happen if we ever got divorced. Not because I was planning on it, but because I'm not an idiot. Richard waved that off, saying the trust could be easily dissolved and assets split according to state law if that ever became necessary. Of course, we hope that never happens, he said with this practiced smile. But it's always wise to plan for contingencies. Something felt off about the whole thing, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. The advice seemed reasonable on the surface, and Sarah was so excited about protecting our family that I agreed to think about it. That night, I called my business attorney, Jim. He's been handling my corporate stuff since I started the company and doesn't sugarcoat anything. Jim's one of those old school lawyers who talks straight and bills fairly. No fancy office, but he knows his stuff. Blake, he said after I explained Richard's recommendations, that setup would basically give Sarah equal control over everything you built before you even met her. You sure that's what you want? When he put it that way, it hit different. My construction company, the equipment, the business reputation, I'd built all that myself, years before Sarah and I got together. Why would I need to give her equal ownership of assets she had nothing to do with creating? What would you recommend instead? I asked. If you want asset protection, we can set up structures that protect both of you without giving away half your premarital business. Separate trusts, LLCs, that kind of thing. Takes more paperwork, but keeps things cleaner. Jim explained that there were ways to protect our joint assets while keeping my premarital business interests separate. More complex legally, but it would ensure Sarah was protected without giving her ownership of things she'd never contributed to. I told Sarah I wanted to get a second opinion before making any big moves. She was not happy about that. Blake, we already found a lawyer. Richard knows what he's doing. Why do you need to complicate this? It's not about complicating anything. I just want to make sure we're making the right choice. You don't trust me, she said, and her voice had this edge to it I'd never heard before. You're worried I'm trying to take your precious business? That stung because it wasn't about trust. Or at least, I didn't think it was. But her reaction made me more determined to get that second opinion. 2 weeks later, I met with Jim and an estate planning specialist he recommended. They laid out several options that would protect our assets without essentially making Sarah an equal owner of my premarital business. Look, Jim said, spreading out the paperwork. You want to protect your wife? That's admirable. But there's a difference between protection and giving away ownership of assets you built yourself. The estate planning specialist, Patricia, explained how we could set up separate structures for premarital versus marital assets. More complicated, but legally cleaner if anything ever went wrong. When I explained this to Sarah, she lost it. So you went behind my back and got different lawyers? After we already decided on Richard? I didn't go behind your back. I told you I wanted a second opinion. You don't trust me. You're treating me like I'm some gold digger trying to steal from you. The fight escalated from there. Sarah accused me of being controlling and paranoid, said I was treating our marriage like a business transaction instead of a partnership, kept coming back to how Richard's plan was simpler and more fair. I tried explaining that fair doesn't necessarily mean equal when it comes to premarital assets, but she wasn't having it. The conversation ended with her storming out to stay at her sister's place for a few days until I decided whether I trusted my wife or not. That's when things got really weird. While Sarah was at her sister's, I decided to organize some financial paperwork. We'd talked about filing our taxes jointly for the first time this year, and I wanted to get everything in order. I was looking for our previous year's tax documents when I decided to check Sarah's desk for any W-2s or medical expense receipts she might have filed away. We both used the home office, and she was usually pretty good about keeping financial documents organized. That's when I found the folder. It was tucked between some other files in Sarah's desk drawer. Nothing suspicious about the location. We both used that desk for bills and stuff. But the contents made my blood run cold. Inside was a printed copy of Colorado divorce laws, specifically the sections about asset division. There were handwritten notes in Sarah's writing, 50-50 split of marital assets, business valuation methods, temporary spousal support guidelines. The notes were detailed. She'd written down specific statutes about how courts determine the value of closely held businesses in divorce proceedings. There were calculations about what percentage of my business might be considered marital property based on appreciation during our marriage. There were also printed articles about hiding assets during divorce proceedings, with certain paragraphs highlighted. One article was titled, What to Do When Your Spouse Owns a Business, Protecting Your Financial Future. But the real kick in the gut was the business card paperclipped to the back of the folder. A divorce attorney. Not Richard, the estate planning guy. A different lawyer entirely. One who advertised as specializing in high-asset divorce cases. The business card had handwritten notes on the back. Initial consultation, $500. Contingency fee 40% of settlement. Specializes in business valuation disputes. I sat there staring at this folder for probably 10 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My wife of 4 years, who'd been pushing me to put all our assets into a joint trust, had been researching how to divorce me and get half of everything. There was more. Phone numbers for forensic accountants who specialize in uncovering hidden business assets. Contact information for business appraisers. Even a printed email exchange with someone about documenting spousal contributions to business success. The timeline started making sense. All those questions about business finances. The sudden interest in estate planning. Finding Richard, who recommended structures that would give her equal ownership of everything. She wasn't trying to protect our family. She was setting me up for the cleanest possible divorce rape. My hands were actually shaking as I took photos of every page in that folder. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it and called Jim. "We need to meet," I said, "and I need to move fast." "What's going on?" "I found my wife's divorce research. She's been planning this for months. Jim's a good guy, been through a nasty divorce himself about 10 years ago. When I showed him the photos, he didn't even look surprised." "Jesus, Blake, she was setting you up good. If you'd signed that trust paperwork with Richard, she would have had legitimate claims to half your business." "What do I do?" "Well, you could confront her. But if she's planning what it looks like she's planning, that just gives her a heads up to be more careful. Or we protect your assets first, then see what she does." That conversation happened on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Jim had filed paperwork to establish a separate trust for my premarital business assets. All the company equipment, vehicles, and business accounts got transferred into a trust that only I controlled. The trust structure was brilliant in its simplicity. Since I'd started the business years before meeting Sarah and had documentation proving the timeline, it was legally clean. The trust protected business assets from personal liability while maintaining clear ownership. I also moved most of our joint savings into a separate account. Not all of it, didn't want to tip her off, but enough to ensure I had operating capital if things went sideways. Legally, I was entitled to do this since the money was mostly from business profits I'd earned. Jim also helped me document everything. Photos of all our current assets, copies of all our financial records, documentation of what was mine before the marriage versus what we'd acquired together. If she files for divorce, we want to be able to show exactly what's separate property versus marital property, he explained. We also changed all the business banking relationships, opened new accounts at a different bank, updated all the automatic payments, even changed the business credit cards. If Sarah tried to access business funds, she'd find nothing but closed accounts. The hardest part was acting normal when Sarah came back from her sister's place that weekend. She was all apologetic, saying she'd overreacted and just wanted us to be protected as a family. "I found another attorney who might be a good compromise," she said. "Someone who can set up the estate planning but maybe structure it differently if that makes you more comfortable." I nodded and played along. "That sounds reasonable. Let's see what they recommend." Meanwhile, I was watching her every move like a hawk. Over the next week, I noticed she was on her phone constantly, but would angle the screen away from me or put it down when I came into the room. She started making calls from the garage or outside, claiming she was coordinating schedules with her sister or dealing with work stuff. She also became really interested in the mail. Started getting to the mailbox before I did, sorting through everything. When I asked about it, she said she was expecting some medical insurance paperwork from the hospital. One morning, I watched her through the kitchen window as she went through our mail. She opened a bank statement, studied it carefully, then put it back in the envelope before bringing the rest of the mail inside. She was monitoring our finances, probably trying to establish baseline numbers for her divorce filing. I also started noticing small things missing from my home office. Nothing obvious, but papers had been moved, files were in slightly different orders. She was definitely going through my business documents when I wasn't around. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for work when Sarah announced she was taking a personal day, said she needed to run some errands and handle some personal business in town. Something about the way she said personal business set off every alarm bell in my head. I decided to test a theory. I left for work as usual, but instead of going to the job site, I parked at a coffee shop where I could see our house. Sure enough, about an hour later, Sarah came out dressed like she was going to court. Professional outfit, briefcase I'd never seen before, the works. I followed her downtown, staying back far enough that she wouldn't notice. She parked at the courthouse. My phone started buzzing with notifications. Email alerts from our bank. She was trying to access our joint accounts online, probably to see the current balances before meeting with her lawyer. I waited in my truck for about 2 hours, wondering what was happening inside that building. Was she filing papers, meeting with attorneys, getting advice on timing her next move? When Sarah finally came out of the courthouse, she was carrying a manila envelope and looked pleased with herself. She walked with a confidence I hadn't seen in weeks, like someone who'd just accomplished something important. That afternoon, I got the call I'd been expecting. Blake, this is Janet from Riverside Process Service. I have some documents here that need to be served to you. Are you available to accept service, or would you prefer I come to your workplace? What kind of documents? Divorce papers, sir. Filed this morning by Sarah Henderson versus Blake Henderson. I'll come to you, I said. The process server's office was in a strip mall downtown, sandwiched between a check cashing place and a nail salon. Janet was a middle-aged woman who'd probably seen it all in her line of work. The divorce petition was exactly what I expected, but seeing it in black and white still hit like a punch to the gut. Sarah was claiming we'd grown apart, had irreconcilable differences, and needed to dissolve our marriage. But the real kicker was the asset division requests. She wanted half of everything. The house, the business equipment, investment accounts, even my personal truck that I'd owned before we got married. Her filing claimed that she had contributed significantly to the growth and success of the marital business through emotional support and unpaid labor, and therefore deserved an equal share of its value. Unpaid labor. The woman who'd brought lunch to the job site exactly 3 times in 4 years was claiming she'd provided unpaid labor to my construction company. The petition went on to claim that Sarah had sacrificed career advancement opportunities to support the household and her husband's business endeavors. This was news to me. She'd gotten 2 promotions at the hospital during our marriage, and never once mentioned feeling held back by our relationship. I called Jim immediately. She filed this morning, I told him. Wants half of everything, including the business. Good thing we moved fast, he said. Her lawyer's going to be very surprised when they start discovery. I drove home that evening not knowing what to expect. Would Sarah be there? Would she act like nothing happened? Would she have moved out already? She was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in, acting completely normal. Cheerful, even. Hey, honey, how was your day? I made that chicken recipe you like. I just stared at her. Interesting day. Got some paperwork delivered. Her face didn't change at all. Oh? What kind of paperwork? Divorce papers. Filed by my wife this morning. That's when her mask slipped for just a second. A flash of something, panic, guilt, crossed her face before she recovered. Blake, I can explain. I'm sure you can. But first, I'm curious about something. When exactly were you planning to tell me you'd filed for divorce? After you'd moved out? After you'd cleaned out the bank accounts? When? She set down the spatula and turned to face me fully. I was going to tell you tonight. I just needed to make sure I was protected first. Protected from what? Your husband of 4 years who's never given you any reason not to trust him? This isn't how I wanted this to go. How did you want it to go, Sarah? You research divorce law for months, meet with attorneys behind my back, file papers claiming you deserve half my business, and then what? Surprise me with divorce papers over dinner? She started crying then, but it felt performative. Like she was trying to manipulate the situation back under her control. I didn't want to hurt you. I've been feeling like we're not right for each other, and I needed to make sure I'd be okay financially. So, instead of talking to your husband about your concerns, you decided to research how to take half his assets in a divorce. That's not what this is. Then explain the folder, Sarah. Her face went white. What folder? I walked over to her desk and pulled out the folder I'd photographed weeks earlier. This folder. The one with divorce law research and a divorce attorney's business card. She just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You've been planning this for months, I continued. The estate planning push, the questions about business finances, all of it. You were setting me up. Blake, please, I'm curious about one thing. What changed? What made you decide to file now instead of waiting until you'd gotten me to sign that trust paperwork? She didn't answer, just kept crying and mumbling about how things had gotten complicated. My phone rang. Jim's name on the caller ID. Blake, you need to know something. Sarah's attorney just called my office. They want to schedule an emergency hearing for temporary spousal support and business asset freezing. When? Tomorrow afternoon. They're claiming you've hidden assets and are trying to deny Sarah her rightful share of marital property. I looked at Sarah, who was still crying at the kitchen counter. Yeah, that tracks. After I hung up, Sarah finally found her voice again. Blake, we can still work this out. We don't have to go through with the divorce. I just needed to know I was protected. But if we can figure out a fair way to what? Give you half my business that you had nothing to do with building? I supported you emotionally. I was here for you when things were stressful. Sarah, that's called being a wife. It doesn't entitle you to ownership of assets I built before I even met you. The conversation went in circles from there. Her crying, me staying calm, her making increasingly desperate offers to work things out if I'd just be reasonable about the asset division. Finally, I just said, Sarah, you filed for divorce this morning. You made your choice. I'm going to respect that choice and move forward accordingly. She stayed at the house that night, but we didn't speak. I could hear her on the phone until late, probably with her sister or her attorney, planning their next move. The next morning, she was gone when I woke up. Left a note saying she was staying with her sister and that her attorney would be in touch. The emergency hearing was a shit show. Sarah's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia, different Patricia from the estate planning specialist, came out swinging, claimed I had systematically hidden assets and manipulated financial records to deny Sarah her fair share of our marital property. She presented bank records showing that I'd moved money out of our joint accounts and transferred business assets without Sarah's knowledge, made it sound like I was some kind of financial predator who'd been scheming to screw over my innocent wife. Your Honor, Patricia argued, Mr. Henderson has engaged in a pattern of financial manipulation designed to deprive my client of her rightful share of marital assets. He's transferred business property into a trust, moved joint funds into separate accounts, and done all of this while his wife was unaware that he was planning to file for divorce. The irony was incredible. Sarah's lawyer was accusing me of doing exactly what Sarah had been planning to do to me. Then Jim stood up. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Henderson has been planning this divorce for months, including research into asset division laws and consultation with divorce attorneys, all while encouraging Mr. Henderson to restructure his assets in a way that would have benefited her in divorce proceedings. He presented photos of Sarah's research folder, records of her meetings with attorneys, and documentation showing the timeline of her questions about business finances versus when she filed for divorce. Mr. Henderson didn't hide assets, Your Honor. He protected premarital assets from what appears to have been a calculated attempt to claim ownership of a business his wife had no role in building. Jim also presented the timeline of Sarah's behavior, the estate planning push, the specific financial questions, her research into divorce law. It painted a clear picture of someone preparing for a divorce while pretending to work on the marriage. The judge looked through everything, asked a few questions, and then made her ruling. I'm not going to freeze any business assets at this time. Mr. Henderson has a right to protect premarital property, and there's significant evidence that Mrs. Henderson was aware of and planning this divorce well before filing. However, I am ordering both parties to maintain current asset levels until we can sort out what's truly marital property versus separate property. Sarah's attorney looked like she'd been slapped. They'd clearly expected to walk out with temporary control over half my business. After the hearing, Patricia pulled Jim aside while Sarah waited in the hallway. Your client might want to consider a generous settlement offer, she said. Mrs. Henderson has been very emotionally damaged by this whole ordeal. Jim just laughed. I'm sure she has been, but emotional damages don't create ownership stakes in premarital businesses. That evening, Sarah called me. Sarah, Blake, this is getting out of hand. Can we please just meet and talk like adults? Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Sarah looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days, but I'd learned not to trust appearances where she was concerned. I want to apologize, she started. This whole thing got way more complicated than I intended. What did you intend exactly? I was scared about our future. I started reading about what happens to wives when marriages don't work out, especially when the husband owns a business. I got paranoid about protecting myself. So you researched how to divorce me and take half my assets. I was just trying to understand my options. For months, Sarah. You researched your options for months while encouraging me to restructure my assets in a way that would benefit you. She was quiet for a moment, then said something that floored me. What if we called it off? Called what off? The divorce. What if we just canceled it? Said it was a mistake? I stared at her. You want to cancel our divorce? I mean, we could say I was just scared and made a bad decision. We could go to counseling, work things out. Sarah, you can't just cancel a divorce after filing papers and trying to claim half someone's business. Why not? We're still married. We could dismiss the case and start over. That's when it hit me. She wasn't apologizing because she felt bad about what she'd done. She was panicking because her plan hadn't worked. She'd expected to either get me to sign over joint ownership of my assets through the estate planning scam, or to successfully claim half of everything in the divorce. When neither plan worked, she was trying to hit the reset button. You know what, Sarah? You're right. This has been a huge misunderstanding. Her face lit up. Really? You think we can work this out? Absolutely. Just one question. When you say cancel the divorce, do you mean you want to stay married and work on our relationship? Or do you mean you want another shot at getting half my business? The question caught her off guard. She stammered for a moment before saying, I just want us to be happy. Then you'll be happy to know I've found happiness. In the form of a wife-free life where I don't have to worry about someone researching how to financially destroy me. Her face fell. Blake, please. I made a mistake. You made a series of calculated decisions over several months. That's not a mistake. That's a plan. I stood up to leave, then turned back. Oh, and Sarah? My attorney says if you try to withdraw the divorce petition, it'll look like you filed frivolously. That can impact the final settlement. So maybe think that through before you decide you want to cancel anything. 2 weeks later, Patricia called Jim with a new settlement proposal. Instead of demanding half of everything, Sarah was now willing to accept the house and half of our joint savings in exchange for dropping any claims to the business. Counteroffer, Jim replied. She gets whatever she can prove she actually contributed to marital assets plus moving expenses. Take it or leave it. They tried to negotiate, came back asking for a third of the joint savings in Sarah's car. Then they wanted just the car and enough money for Sarah to put a deposit on an apartment. Each offer was smaller than the last, as it became clear they had no leverage. Finally, they took our original offer. The final settlement was beautiful in its simplicity. Sarah got half of the money we'd saved together during our marriage, about $45,000. She got her personal belongings, her car, and exactly zero claim to my business or any premarital assets. I kept the house, since I'd paid the down payment from business funds before we were married, the business, all business equipment, and my sanity. The day the divorce was finalized, Sarah called me one last time. I hope you know this isn't what I wanted, she said. I'm pretty sure it is exactly what you wanted, Sarah. You just didn't expect me to be prepared for it. You make me sound like some kind of gold digger. I don't have to make you sound like anything. Your actions speak for themselves. What if I told you it was all just a test, to see if you really loved me? I actually laughed out loud. A test that involved filing legal papers and trying to claim half my business? That's some expensive testing, Sarah. Or what if it was all just a prank? Like, to see how you'd react. A prank? You're calling your divorce filing a prank. I'm just saying, maybe we both overreacted to what was essentially a misunderstanding. Sarah, here's the thing about pranks. They're supposed to be funny. Nobody's laughing. She tried a few more angles over the next few months. Her sister called to tell me I was throwing away a good woman over money. Her mom sent me a long text about forgiveness and second chances. Even ran into Sarah at the grocery store once, where she tried to act like we were old friends just catching up. But I was done. You don't get to research how to financially destroy someone, file legal papers to make it happen, and then call it a misunderstanding when you get caught. The funniest part? Sarah's still single too, according to mutual friends. Turns out when word gets around that you tried to divorce rape your husband for his business, it doesn't exactly make you a hot commodity on the dating market. Jim always jokes that I should send her a Christmas card every year thanking her for the lesson in asset protection. I think that might be a bit much, but I do appreciate the education. Never thought I'd be grateful to find divorce research in my wife's desk drawer, but life's funny that way. These days, the only person planning my financial future is me, and that's exactly how I like it.